Have you ever stopped to wonder, could a simple circle of thorns, dry, brittle, and ancient, hold the power to change the way we see Jesus? Could it be real? Or is it the greatest relic mystery of all time? For centuries, the Crown of Thorns has been revered as one of the most sacred objects in Christian history. Said to be the very same thorny wreath placed on Jesus' head before the crucifixion, it now rests behind thick glass in the heart of Paris. But here's the problem. There's no official carbon dating, no eyewitness account of its journey from Golgotha to Europe. And yet, hundreds of churches across the world claim to possess a thorn from it. So what's going on? Is this relic a symbol of divine truth, or is it a masterpiece of medieval deception? Today we're diving deep into the history, the legends, and the controversies that surround the Crown of Thorns. We'll follow its mysterious trail through ancient empires, religious politics, and scientific skepticism. By the end of this video, you might find your faith tested or strengthened, because this isn't just about a relic, it's about belief, power, and the question that still haunts historians and believers alike. What if it's real? To understand the mystery of the Crown of Thorns, we have to go back, not just to Jerusalem, but to the tangled web of power and faith that stretched across empires. The Gospels tell us that Roman soldiers mocked Jesus by twisting a crown of thorns and forcing it onto his head before leading him to Calvary. But what happened to it after the crucifixion? The New Testament never mentions it again. There's no passage describing the disciples preserving it, like the shroud or the empty tomb. For centuries, silence followed. Then suddenly, almost 1,000 years later, it resurfaces. Around the 4th century AD, a wave of relic hunting fever gripped the Christian world. After Constantine legalized Christianity, the once persecuted faith began building churches, basilicas, and treasuries filled with sacred objects. In this context, relics weren't just devotional items, they were spiritual currency. They gave legitimacy to churches and power to kings. To own a relic was to hold a piece of heaven on earth. By the 6th century, records claim the Crown of Thorns was being venerated in Jerusalem. Later, it supposedly made its way to Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire's capital. And this is where the story begins to sound less like faith and more like diplomacy. In the year 1238, the Byzantine Emperor Baldwin II was on the brink of collapse. His treasury was empty, his grip on the empire was slipping, and in a desperate move he offered something unthinkable for sale: the Crown of Thorns. Louis IX of France, later canonized as Saint Louis, seized the opportunity. In a transaction that would cost today's equivalent of millions, he purchased the relic and brought it back to France in triumph. He didn't just buy a crown, he bought an unshakable symbol of divine favor. But he didn't stop there. To house the relic, Louis commissioned a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, a private royal chapel bathed in light and stained glass. The crown was displayed on a golden altar, surrounded by scenes from the Old and New Testaments. To the medieval mind, this wasn't just a building, it was a theological theater. And at its center was the proof that Louis ruled not only with earthly might, but with heavenly endorsement. From then on, the Crown of Thorns wasn't just a relic, it was a tool of political theology. Each year on Good Friday, French kings would process barefoot to Sainte-Chapelle to venerate it. And in doing so, they weren't just honoring Christ, they were reminding everyone that their power came from God himself. The Crown of Thorns had become a bridge between the cross and the crown, linking divine suffering with royal authority. But not everyone was convinced. Even in the Middle Ages, some theologians quietly doubted the authenticity of many relics, including this one. How had something so fragile survived for over a millennium? And why had no one heard of it until centuries after the crucifixion? Yet those questions didn't slow its influence, because whether it was truly the crown or not, it served its purpose: to unify people, inspire awe, and legitimize rule. And perhaps that's the most revealing thing about its story: how easily sacred objects can be shaped by secular ambitions. By the 14th century, dozens of churches across Europe claimed to possess thorns taken from the crown. They were gifts from monarchs, tokens of alliance, or rewards for loyalty. Over time, the relic was fragmented, physically and politically, until the crown itself was little more than a loop of rushes, its original thorns long gone. Even so, the empty ring retained its symbolic power. When the French Revolution erupted, it was hidden for safekeeping. When Napoleon rose to power, he allowed it to return to Notre-Dame. And when the cathedral caught fire in 2019, the relic was rushed out of the flames by firefighters and priests who believed they were saving more than just an artifact. They were protecting a link to the divine. In a strange way, the crown's survival isn't a story of proof. It's a story of purpose. Whether it was the true crown or not didn't matter as much as what it represented to those who held it. Hope in suffering, beauty in sacrifice, and heaven in the hands of men. In an age where DNA can identify a person from a single strand of hair, and carbon dating can pinpoint the age of a tree stump within decades, you'd think proving or disproving a relic like the Crown of Thorns would be straightforward. It's not, and that in itself is part of the controversy. You see, the Crown of Thorns housed in Notre-Dame Cathedral is not a crown in the traditional sense. What survives today is a woven circlet made from a flexible reed plant, most likely Juncus balticus, or Baltic rush. It's about 21 centimeters in diameter, and, importantly, it no longer has any thorns. That's right, the thorns, the very elements that gave the object its meaning, are gone. Over the centuries, dozens of them were removed and distributed to monarchs, cardinals, and churches across Europe. Many are now encased in gilded reliquaries, proudly displayed in chapels from Spain to Poland. But herein lies a problem. In the 19th century, French architect and historian Charles Rohaut de Fleury attempted to track these fragments. His conclusion: at least 139 thorns were being claimed as pieces of the original crown. Far more than any single wreath would logically contain. That raises an unsettling question. Were the thorns duplicated for profit or prestige? Were some outright fakes, crafted to meet demand as belief spread? And if so, could the crown itself be just as questionable? Unlike other famous relics, such as the Shroud of Turin, the Crown of Thorns has never been subjected to rigorous public scientific analysis. No official carbon dating has been done. No microscopic material comparison with plants native to Judea. No testing under modern archaeological scrutiny. Part of this is due to the Church's stance. They are not interested in reducing sacred relics to lab samples. These objects are meant for veneration, not verification. The Vatican has long emphasized that relics serve the faithful as symbols, not scientific proof. And in a way that's consistent with Catholic theology, faith by definition does not require physical evidence. But outside that theological bubble, many scholars remain skeptical. If we can't date the crown, if we can't trace its chain of custody from Jerusalem to Constantinople with hard evidence, if we can't even confirm that the plant species used in its construction was native to first-century Palestine, then what do we really have? Even the historical claims from Byzantium raise eyebrows. There's no record of the Crown of Thorns in any ancient Roman inventory, no mention in the writings of early church fathers. Its first appearance in religious literature doesn't happen until several centuries after Jesus' death, long after any real evidence would have survived. And yet, despite this absence of proof, the relic's fame exploded. Why? Part of it comes down to the psychology of relics. In medieval times, relics offered something tangible in a world dominated by mystery. Most people couldn't read the Bible. They didn't have personal copies of Scripture, but they could see, touch, and kneel before a crown of thorns. It made the passion real in a way that sermons couldn't. That emotional connection is powerful, and it's what's allowed so many competing relics to flourish, even in the face of contradiction. You can visit Cologne and see a thorn, or Vienna, or Prague, or Andechs in Germany. Each location tells its own version of how their particular thorn got there. Some were supposedly brought back by crusaders. Others were gifts from Louis IX. A few were discovered by visionaries or mystics. But none come with clear, continuous documentation. There is no forensic trail, no scientific match, only tradition and trust. And that opens the door for a different kind of controversy. Not just scientific, but spiritual. Because for every faithful believer who sees these relics as sacred links to Christ's suffering, there's a critic who sees them as tools of manipulation, commerce, or even deceit. During the Protestant Reformation, Reformers like Martin Luther railed against the Catholic Church's relic industry, claiming it commodified holiness and exploited the faithful. Some of those accusations were surely exaggerated, but they weren't entirely wrong. Today, the Vatican enforces stricter rules on relic authentication. It has banned the sale of relics and attempts to discourage the proliferation of fake holy items online. But it's too late to erase the past. The market for relics, real or not, left behind a labyrinth of competing claims that still confuse even serious historians. And the Crown of Thorns sits at the center of it all, a relic that is either the most sacred object on earth or a 13th century spiritual souvenir elevated by time, politics, and devotion. So where does that leave us? In a peculiar middle ground, we're stuck between the yearning for something divine and the reality that science has, so far, refused to validate it. But maybe, just maybe, the real question isn't whether the crown is real. Maybe it's this: why do so many want it to be? April 15th, 2019. As dusk fell over Paris, the unthinkable happened. Flames burst through the roof of Notre-Dame Cathedral, one of the most iconic religious sites in the world. Within minutes, smoke was billowing into the sky. The cathedral's wooden interior, some of it dating back to the 13th century, became a towering inferno. News outlets scrambled. Social media lit up. People watched live as the spire collapsed, taking centuries of history down with it. And somewhere inside that collapsing cathedral was the Crown of Thorns. For a few agonizing hours, no one knew what had survived. The world held its breath, not just for the building, but for the relics hidden within. Among them were the tunic of St. Louis, relics of the Passion, and most famously, the circular, thornless crown said to have once rested on the head of Christ. But then, word broke. The Crown of Thorns had been saved. It wasn't a team of archaeologists or armed guards who rescued it. It was a priest, Father Jean-Marc Fournier, chaplain of the Paris Fire Brigade. He had already earned international respect after rushing into the Bataclan Theater in 2015 to comfort the dying during the Paris terrorist attacks. Now he was at the heart of another crisis. Wearing his clerical collar and firefighter gear, Father Fournier insisted on entering the burning structure. Accompanied by a small team, he made his way through the smoke-choked aisles to the cathedral's treasury. There, among silver reliquaries and priceless icons, they located the Crown of Thorns, sealed inside its gilded container. He carried it out with the help of firefighters, just minutes before the ceiling collapsed. To many believers, this wasn't just good fortune, it was a miracle. The flames destroyed the spire. They melted lead. They damaged priceless wood carvings and shattered parts of the cathedral's roof. But the relic of Christ's suffering was spared. It seemed almost poetic. A symbol of pain, humiliation, and sacrifice had once again survived destruction. It wouldn't be the first time. You see, Notre-Dame had already been through revolutions, desecration, and neglect. During the French Revolution, the cathedral was ransacked. Statues were decapitated, relics were removed or sold. The building was even converted into a temple of reason. But somehow the crown survived. It was hidden, protected, passed from believer to believer until it could be returned to the church. And in 2019, history repeated itself. Images of firefighters carrying the relic out of the inferno flashed across the world. Crowds wept in the streets of Paris. The Pope expressed his solidarity. Even world leaders paused to acknowledge what was nearly lost. Millions of dollars in donations poured in to help rebuild Notre-Dame. But none of that compared to the image burned into the global consciousness, a circle of thorns, untouched by fire. It wasn't long before spiritual interpretations began circulating. Some called it a sign. Others saw it as a symbol of hope in the face of despair. For a church facing scandal and decline in Europe, the crown's survival became a metaphor for endurance, proof that what is sacred can still withstand destruction. Skeptics, of course, offered another view. They pointed out that the relic was stored in a protective case within a stone building and was retrieved by trained emergency professionals. From that angle, it was courage and coordination, not divine intervention, that saved it. But does that really matter? For the millions watching that night, something stirred. People who hadn't set foot in a church in years found themselves praying, not just for a building, but for what it meant. Notre-Dame represented continuity, history, faith, the kind that bends, breaks, and burns, but somehow never disappears. In that moment, the Crown of Thorns was no longer just a relic with disputed origins. It was a symbol of collective memory. Not everyone knew its history, not everyone believed in its authenticity, but they believed in something, the power of a story, the hope that some things are too sacred to be lost, that pain can be preserved and suffering can be redeemed. Since the fire, the crown has been stored in the Louvre Museum for safekeeping. It awaits the restoration of Notre-Dame, scheduled to reopen in time for the 2024 Paris Olympics. Until then, it is protected behind glass, visible only to a few, venerated by millions and still shrouded in mystery. And maybe that's the point. The fire did what no controversy, no scholar, no skeptic could do. It reignited global interest in the Crown of Thorns. Not because it was scientifically verified, but because it survived. Sometimes the things we most desperately want to believe in don't need to be proven. They just need to endure. So what exactly are we left with? A fragile circlet of woven rushes, a dozen surviving thorns scattered across Europe, a relic steeped in centuries of worship, myth, and controversy. Is the Crown of Thorns truly the one worn by Jesus Christ? Or is it one of history's most enduring illusions? A relic so powerful in meaning that it survived not because of its truth, but because of what people needed it to be. The truth is, we may never know. There is no surviving document from the first century tracing its journey. There is no inscription etched by the hands of apostles saying, "This was worn by the Son of God." No carbon test has confirmed its age. No forensic method has ruled it in or ruled it out. All we have is a chain of belief, a succession of emperors, kings, bishops, scholars, and ordinary people who accepted, without proof, that this relic was holy, that it connected heaven and earth. And that brings us to a deeper question. If something can't be proven, does that mean it's worthless? Our modern minds crave evidence. We want radiocarbon dating, DNA analysis, authentication certificates, and rightly so. We live in a world plagued by forgeries, misinformation, and religious exploitation. The caution is healthy. But faith by its nature doesn't operate by laboratory standards. Faith lives in the tension between what we can't prove and what we still believe. To a skeptic, the Crown of Thorns may look like a medieval invention, sold to a desperate emperor, glorified by a devout king, and amplified by centuries of tradition. But to a believer, it's something entirely different. It's not just a physical object. It's a window into Christ's agony. It's a tangible echo of Good Friday, a reminder that Jesus was mocked, humiliated, and crowned with pain, so that we might be crowned with mercy. It doesn't need to be real to be meaningful. And yet, the very possibility that it could be real, that it might truly have touched the brow of Christ as he staggered toward Calvary, that possibility is enough to draw millions, not to worship the object, but to contemplate the sacrifice behind it. The power of the crown lies not in botanical verification, but in what it calls us to remember. Even if the relic is a replica, even if the thorns were crafted by monks in Constantinople or tradesmen in medieval Paris, the message doesn't change. The King of Kings wore a crown not of gold, but of suffering. That alone is worth contemplating. And yet, there's another side to this coin. We must also acknowledge the darker history of relics. There were times when faith was weaponized, when relics were sold for money, used to manipulate, or wielded to assert political dominance, when a single thorn could buy an alliance, when churches built empires on the bones of supposed saints. It would be dishonest to ignore that. So perhaps the Crown of Thorns stands at the crossroads of two great human tendencies: our capacity for deep, sincere devotion and our vulnerability to illusion. It invites us to ask, what do we really worship? The object itself, or the truth it's meant to represent? Maybe that's what makes the crown so fascinating. It refuses to give us a clear answer. It is ancient, yet uncertain. It is sacred, yet scientifically unverified. It is venerated by millions, yet doubted by many. It is both a relic and a riddle. And in that ambiguity, it becomes more than a museum piece or liturgical artifact. It becomes a mirror. When we look at the crown, what we really see is ourselves, our longing for meaning, our struggle with doubt, our hunger for the divine in a world full of noise. Some will walk away from this video unmoved. They'll say, it's just a crown of rushes, nothing more. Others will feel something stir, not because of the object itself, but because of the story, the suffering, the sacrifice, the love that radiates through the Gospels and still touches human hearts. And maybe that's the true miracle. Not that a relic survived a fire, but that in a skeptical world, a simple crown, woven from thorns, handed down through centuries of uncertainty, can still cause us to pause, to wonder, to believe. If this video made you think, share it with someone who's wrestling with faith or fascinated by history. Leave a comment below. Do you believe the Crown of Thorns is authentic, or do you think it's simply a powerful symbol? We want to hear your thoughts, your doubts, your convictions, your questions. And if you'd like more deep dives into the mysteries of faith, relics, and history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There's so much more to explore together. Because whether or not the crown is real, the questions it raises are.